I woke up one morning and I had some things going on that didn't seem right. And I had to go to the emergency room to find out what was going on. I had double vision and weird things. And so when they tested everything, they said, you have multiple sclerosis. And that kind of was a gut punch because I had known people throughout my life that had that. It's dear to me and saw them going through what they were going through. And then to hear that, I have that diagnosis, I was like, everything or something's got to change in a big way. And it led me to one, going back to my belief in prevention and different kinds of interventions than big medical stuff, because I was told all kinds of things. 10 years, you're going to be in a wheelchair. And they predicted all these things and said them to me as they were giving me this news. And I'm like, fuck you. That does not have to be true.
Well, I hope you're ready for another amazing podcast. Jennifer Una is just a dear, dear friend who came in as a massage client with a frozen shoulder well over 15 years ago. Just from that and over the years, it just blossomed this beautiful friendship. And this woman is, first off, she's just a consummate artist. Her whole life is about art, the tactile arts, all the way from weaving and painting and collage, things that started when she was very, very young, coming from a fairly artistic family. Music, she plays the bass, which is amazing. And I remember when she used to play the cello. She's just woven this artistry into every part of her life. In the early 2000s, she really started getting into nutrition after being diagnosed with MS, and has taken that study to a depth that is seldom seen. She has dug into all the pieces, all the different diets and trends. And in this podcast, we talk about nutrition and somatics. We talk about her new course that she has, that she's running in Dixon, New Mexico, where she lives. We talk about the upcoming 5-day cleanse that she's going to be running that is going to be available online. We talk about grief. We talk about building community. We talk about the need to get back to our humanity, to our natural selves, to that place that feels and knows the earth and the visceralness of it and the eroticism of it. And we talk about the weight of being aware, of keeping yourself informed and being responsible for the state of the world, your own inner state, your body state, your physicality, your psychology, and then those around you, and then the world at large, the global interconnectedness. It's a really beautiful conversation, and I am so glad to be able to bring my friend and colleague and collaborator into your lives. Enjoy. Jen, so good to see you. And welcome to the Somatic Pleasure Podcast. And just real briefly, I want to say that, for anybody watching, I've known Jen now for at least 15 years. We've been trying to figure out exactly when it was we met, and she came in as a client, a massage client up in Fort Bragg, California. And it's just been history ever since. And we have these amazing conversations, and we've actually recorded some of them just for us. But now we are putting it out for y'all to sort of get to know Jen, and also just be on the inside privy to our amazing, amazing conversations. So here we are. Jen, just let us know a little bit about you and your history, and it's all yours. Take it away.
Well, thanks for inviting me on here. Yeah. Can you hear me? Thanks for
Absolutely
inviting me on here, because we have had a lot of great conversations. And like James said, we've known each other about 15 years. And I was kind of limping around Fort Bragg with frozen shoulder and trying to work. I was working at Living Light, which is was a raw food education center, restaurant, store, amazing resource that I tapped into about during that time. I had gotten a certificate in holistic nutrition education and chefery, and that was like a 3 or 4 year process. And then I added in this raw food angle, and yeah, met James and told him about what was going on with me physically and got some body work from him. And it just spurred more conversations. What do you do? What do you do? What do you want to see? What do you want to see? And, we shared things about this information should get out there about the things that we've been practicing. And, but then we've gone our own way and explored, and I've lived 3 different places since then, and I think he has too. And but it's a beautiful thing to have, live long enough to see the arc of a friendship and professional life and connection to different communities. And I never lost like the vision of how I wanted to be in the world, but it has changed a lot of hats. Oh, we didn't wear our hats. It's changed a lot of it's gone through morphed through different ways that we've expressed ourselves, right? Yeah, so the experience up there in Fort Bragg, Northern California coast, was just a blip. It was just a little bit of time, but I was living in Sonoma County. Before that, I was living in Marin County. Before that, I was living in San Francisco, Seattle, this whole West Coast swath of most of my life. And now I'm living in New Mexico, which is a completely different ecosystem, completely different environment.
A little tiny town.
It's the tiniest town you can imagine, with the most packed into it. And I can tell you more about that if you're interested. But yeah.
Oh, we're interested, but I've been
Yeah.
there, so
James has been my guest, and he's also done a lot of exploring in this area during the time that he was looking into different communities and people doing this work in community. And I'm still really interested in knowing more about that, because now I have this feeling like, wow, community is key. It's the core, and it scares me to death. It just scares me shitless. The whole community thing, interpersonal relationships, all of that stuff has been my, bugaboo forever. Like I'm bad at it or something. But every time I do my work, whether it's, I've done art, I've done, body work, I've done parenting, and now, I just kind of blop myself down here. COVID hit. I couldn't interact with these new people and be in a community. So I, went online and did little classes online and tried to have some sense of interpersonal, extrapersonal connection. And yeah, so that brings us up to now, like, now what do I do? But James and I have
right. Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, this is part of like this ongoing conversation, which, I mean, I want to make sure that we get into the nutrition side of it, and because I think this is really integral to what we're talking about. But this idea of community building or living in community, and you and I have talked about this. I feel like we've lost our sense of what that feels like and is like. So when I was traveling and living in like Central America, community is huge, and most of the people live in these small rural communities that are very insular and very connected. I mean, sometimes in really dysfunctional ways. But the point is that everybody is more used to living in community than they are apart. But in our country, it feels like we're more used to, you know, very individualistic kind of living. And I think we're suffering a lot from it. And so this is one of the driving forces of much of our conversation over the years, you know, and when I took off a few years ago to do my walkabout and look at different communities, it was with that idea of like, Jesus, how is this done? How do we do this? Where do we go from here? You know? And I mean, my experience of you as well, Jen, is somebody who is kind of an activator, instigator of getting people together, you know, whether it's the farmers market or the art walks and open studios, you know, those kind of organizations, and you know, reaching out and connecting with a huge variety of people and activities in whatever area you're in. It feels like, you know, you're like, oh yeah, there's this person and that person. I mean, you connected me with a lot of different people throughout the years, for sure. So yeah, that
Yeah,
hunger is really alive,
that's the
really
common
alive.
theme. And I was super active when I was in California, and when I had the opportunity to escape California and come somewhere that I always had this fantasy about, I sold everything, culinary equipment and blah blah blah, and then, you know, just jettisoned a lot of stuff, thinking
Hmm.
I need a fresh start. I'm not going to bring all this stuff with me. I'm probably not going to do food and events and teaching and all. I don't know why I thought that I could just stop like I was at the end of some long trail. But, you know, after COVID and after getting to know people more and seeing what they were like individually and what their issues were, what their challenges were, I thought, oh my God, I have all this information and I'm constantly applying it to myself. I'm always studying. I'm always like trying to find out what the latest thing is in holistic nutrition and food systems, and my that turns out to be my thing. And I've written some articles about this whole arc from childhood till now, 70 years of looking at you know, how people relate to their food and their bodies and each other and their communities. And it's been really, really amazing to collect all those stories. Like my grandmother, who grew up in Germany and immigrated here in her 20s by herself. And you know, she was a foodie, and she never stopped talking about it, and it was bothered everybody. You know, she's always, you know, talking about food and cooking and nutrition, all this stuff. So I must have picked up something, because I liked hearing about it. I liked hearing about what she had learned by listening to the radio and this nutrition guru in the 50s or 60s, you know, talking about, if you eat this, if you feed your husband this, you'll have better sex. That was like a thing that she
Ooh,
shared with me. And I'm like,
wow.
keep that in mind. You're still a virgin, but keep, you know, when the time comes, you will have some information. And she was great. You know, she talked to me about masturbation and things that I was like, grandmothers don't talk to their kids about, but, or grandkids about. But it planted this seed that there was this relationship between where the food comes from, where it's farmed, who picks it, how it gets to your house. She lived in a dairy heavy area in upstate New York after they retired and left New York City. They lived in a place where they could get their food right out the door. And I was really impressed by that. And
Mhm.
I loved listening to the contrast of her growing up in, you know, like in the 20s in Berlin. They were starving, you know, between the wars, and then New York City, which is, you know, pretty intense. And then, yeah, so when she and my grandfather were older and retired, they moved upstate and lived in a very agricultural area, and it was beautiful. That I my you know,
Mhm.
part of my childhood saw that in action. So it kind of arcs from, all the different places in between. And now I live in a heavily agricultural area. People raise animals and they slaughter them themselves. They break them down. They use the food that they grow. They have gardens. They farm. Younger people are learning farming. Older people are like,
And there's
we don't
a
want to
big
do this anymore.
tradition of right, and in that area also there's some pretty ancient traditions, right? You have the channels that move the water around, and that's something that's been going on for a long time. Plus, the indigenous that were there, had some really incredible technology too, right? Am I
Yeah, so when
speaking
I used to
out of
visit
turn
this
there?
area, I would stop at every roadside stand and talk to the farmers who were selling their chiles or their honey or whatever they had, and again, sort of amassing this information and trying desperately not to fetishize the Santa Fe style that was hot in the 80s. I mean, there was something attractive about it. I was an artist. It seemed very artsy. It seemed like all these different cultures would have these festivals, bring their arts together. But I always knew there was something underneath it. Like this land was taken from the people that were here for thousands of years. And now that I live here, I get to hear the stories about from the Spanish rooted people who came hundreds of years ago. And they brought a lot of things from Spain. They brought the animals, they brought crops, and they brought this system of irrigation, the acequia system, which is alive and well today. I don't know how well because of water and just people getting along, but it's so people have made a lot of documentaries about it, books, films, and I've tried to get get a hold of that information so that I'm uh, awake to that. And those are some cats. Um, and talking to people who are trying to keep that alive and what they're up against in amongst each other, the families and the different people that live on each of these sections that are irrigated. That's really been fascinating and wisening because it's not a perfect system. It was brought here, imposed on what had been working, and now there's like white influx gentrification, money from California and Texas, people buying a house that no one here could buy for themselves, things like that. So there's always this tension. And but what happens to the food? My first thing was like, do you guys have a farmer's market? Well, they did, but it was tiny, tiny. And the people that were running it, they just were doing it on a very, very small level, and it kind of petered out over the last few years for a bunch of reasons. And the manager recently wanted to give it over to somebody else to manage. So I said, I'll do it. So, it's
I'll do it.
said the little red hen. So I got some people together to make it more like a team and not just like one person trying to breathe some new life into this. But back to the things that James and I have talked about. I came up with this because he talks about somatics, and I thought, oh, what I do is kind of like somatic nutrition. I'm a nutritionist and a chef and an artist and a people person, reluctantly, but um, I have to work with people and I have to work with myself. I have to keep healing myself. So I wanted to learn this stuff about food in, later in my 50s is when I went back to school, and I had some issues, and I thought I could learn some stuff and apply it to myself. And then it was like, well, let me just like sprinkle this out there And so I'm sort of looking at the farmers market here growing a little bit into a place where people can bring their traditions together, feel acknowledged for um, their traditions, the indigenous communities especially, and but
Are
also
you
the
connecting with that community, with the indigenous community?
yeah, absolutely. So the way
Are you
that
connecting with that? Yeah.
what what's the question?
I think you're answering it now. Are you connecting with the indigenous community and
Yeah,
bringing them into? Because now you're the high grand poobah of the farmers market. How are you bringing that in your together?
well, I would say since I got here about 6, 7 years ago, I would go to the farmers markets in these different communities around here. They're not reservations, they're not rancherias, they're pueblos, and the different communities, all the different tribes that originated here and are still here and are still in their locale, have their, their central, they have their own government, they have their own society, their own way of their own economy. Still very subsistence level and outsider, but going to, if they were having a farmers market or they were having a festival or they were having something that was, they have dance days when the public can come and see their seasonal rituals throughout the year, and then just talking to people there and meeting people there. And whenever there was anything food or farm related, I would try to, like, see if I could connect. So what I'm doing now is kind of crazy, but I just was felt called to do it, which was to, since I got here, I thought I want to create some kind of forum where all these different voices could come together, sit together, talk to each other,
Mm.
share. I know they're very busy because they're farmers, but wouldn't it be great to take, that guy and that guy and that guy and have them, um, talk to the community here that doesn't go and talk to them. It was sort of like a little bit of an imposition. Like I had the idea and I'm going to set this up. But that was when I first got here in COVID. What happened there is everybody got all isolated. But recently I decided I'm going to start teaching some cooking stuff. I'm going to start teaching people about food, what I know, the way I look at it. And so it turns out the way I look at it is this very um, multi angled way of looking at it. It's not like just like I'm starving, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat, I'm partying, I'm gonna eat that, I'm I'm traveling, so fast food doesn't count. I have all these sort of stupid little rules about my relationship with my body and food and stuff. So I figure other people do too. So I'm always trying to improve that. Not improve it, but be conscious of it. Be conscious of what happens when I eat that thing and blah blah blah.
Right.
So I there's a
Is that
little
what it, is that what you would call the somatic nutrition? Is how that feels in your body? How would you define that?
well, when I started playing just through our conversations and where does somatics, what is somatics, where does that fit into what I'm doing, and I realized, well, it's a very body centric thing to do, to eat. And the
Yeah.
body has all of its ways of dealing with what comes in, what goes out, what gets assimilated, what gets used, what keeps us alive. And I love that dance. That I love the whole metaphor of digestion and all the stages that things get discovered, experienced, brought in, you know, incorporated, integrated.
It's pretty miraculous, I mean, when you really sit and think about like what happens when you just take a drink of water, you know what I mean? Or take a breath or chew on a piece of toast, just the processes. I'm trying to remember who that was that wrote a, I can't remember. I won't even mention it now, but this woman wrote this great book. It was just like so fun to
I know what
watch.
you're
I
talking
think,
about. Yeah, it goes through the whole thing
yeah.
with chewing and shitting and yeah. So that's a brilliant book.
And all the ways, that we test for, flavors that marketers will use, and how dog food is flavored and marketed. It's very human centric, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, but that's part of it.
Yeah, so
The thing
yeah.
of so what I since I did go back to school when I was in my 50s and took this 3-4 year study with internships and then started doing it professionally. What I was
And that
very
was with who? Who was that with?
That was at Bowman
Who
College.
was that with?
Bowman
Bowman
College.
College, right?
Um, that's a brilliant uh, institution, and thousands of people have gone through that program, and I still believe in the
Hmm.
way they teach because our very first class was about soil and was about looked at agriculture and mega agri big ag and different
Hmm.
policies like the political policies in our country, the farm bill, and it was very eye-opening because I'd been paying attention to the ecology of food systems and farming and pesticides and pollution and sustainable systems that people were always coming up with and never really got completely incorporated by our government. The whole
Right.
corporate way of greed and money based way of looking at everything that we do in this country. So I thought, okay, I'm in the right place because they're talking about this holistic thing of you are what you eat, and if you're eating the pesticides that get put on the plants to keep the plants all transportable instead of
Right.
digestible. I was very excited by that, and that's the way I'm teaching now, is like, let's start from the ground up sort of thing. um
I, I I have a little story. I met Ed, right? That was his name, Ed Bowen.
yeah, he's the president of the
Yeah.
school.
He came in through somebody else, and I actually
Sally.
gave him body work at some point.
Sally in
Sally, through
Mendocino.
Sally, that's right. And he was an
Hi, Sally.
amazing person. Just, in my experience of people, I can feel them because of the kind of work that I do. And he was just a really amazing energy in person. I know that he's got issues just like all of us, but he definitely had a presence. You can feel the wisdom in there.
Yeah, I always honor him because I did my internship after I graduated and got my certificate. I did my internship with him, working in his clinic, side by side with him, with the people that would come in for. They would get tested. They would get look at all of their issues, and then he would make recommendations, and I was there to witness that process. Even though I wasn't going to be a clinical person, it was really important for my training to see people in their most vulnerable state, and people who had
Hmm.
cancer, people that had chronic issues, people had issues with their family, their children, and just sitting and listening to their stories. And then I was the note taker, and he also had me doing a lot of research, reading a lot of the research that he was collecting around cancer and food and nutrition as a way to prevent or keep the control or the maybe even the eradication of the conditions in the body that would rise to cancer.
Hmm.
And so that went in the pot. I didn't end up working with that personally, but it's in our world. And It turns out that
Well, that
right.
was a really amazing time, the early 2000s. You know what I mean? It was just, there was a lot of that going on. And, where we met at in Fort Bragg at the Living Light Institute or Culinary School, and then the Bowman Institute, and then True North there in Santa Rosa, right?
Yeah,
And then just the whole zeitgeist. You had the guy Robbins that wrote uh, what was the name of that book? The
food
China study,
revolution.
and
No, that was the
the
food
blue dot
revolution.
study, or all of
Yeah,
this.
all those
It
guys.
was really a fruitful time.
And continues to be, which I feel really lucky because in 20 well, in the early aughts, in actually 2003, I woke up one morning and I had some things going on that didn't seem right. And I had to go to the emergency room to find out what was going on. I had double vision and weird things. And so when
Oh,
they
wow.
tested everything, um, they said, you have multiple sclerosis. And that kind of was
Mm.
a gut punch because I had known people throughout my life that had that and they were really fucked up and dear to me and saw them going through what they were going through. And then to hear that, I have that diagnosis, I was like, okay, everything or something's got to change in a big way. And
Mhm.
so that's a whole story in itself. We could do another conversation, but it led me to one, going back to my belief in prevention and maybe different kinds of interventions than big medical
Mhm.
stuff, because I was told all kinds of things. 10 years, you're going to be in a wheelchair, and you're going to, they
Wow.
predicted all these things and said them to me as they were giving me this news. And I'm like, fuck you. Does not have to be true.
Yes.
So that is a sort of a scary part. The scary mommy part of me is like, I don't accept that. I'm getting divorced. I'm getting the fuck out of here. I'm going to figure out something else to do. And so, because I had this food body connection, it wasn't that far away for me to start trying to find out if there was something I could do nutritionally to, kind of ward off any symptoms I was having. What are the symptoms? What can I do about that? It's all about inflammation
Mhm.
and things happening to different parts of the body because something's out of balance. And so I had to learn quick about uh, the gut biome, where all these protections, the immune system is happening. What happened to my immune system that it would develop into this thing? I don't really believe in the different diseases like you have MS. It's like, no, I have an imbalance in my system that's leading to something not
Mhm.
functioning correctly. So let's get to that. And so that's kind of the
It
heart
is so
of what I
important.
do. But a big, big, big part of it isn't the biophysics, the biophysics of it. It's you know, the the way you feel about yourself, your self-talk, your self-esteem, your story, things that have gotten into your body because of things that have happened to you physically, emotionally, right? James, back me up here
I
because
mean, no, I'm 100% with you. It was when I. It's interesting, and I don't want to derail too much from what we're talking about, but my mom had a similar situation where right after I was born, we both got really sick, and apparently, I don't know the whole story, but apparently, like pretty close to, dying. And she made that same decision. She's like, I'm gonna figure this shit out. And she sounds a little bit like your grandma. She went. We had Prevention Magazine. We had the Back to Eden. We had Diet for a Small Planet. These were resources and vitamins and supplements, and she was just, it was deep research that she did like this, and just turned the whole family around. It was just amazing. We were never sick as kids. But yeah, and that's where I picked up that same idea that you're talking about, that we can actually resource ourselves. Our bodies are amazing. um Not machines. I don't look at them as machines, like ecosystems that just need to be brought into balance. And we can learn we can do that. We can learn how to do that, and then that whole place that you were just talking about too, where our experiences in life, feed that positively or negatively, depending on how you look at it. But and they are treatable. Those things are treatable. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah, and again,
So
the
where did
body.
you go from there? You
Well, yeah, so the
go for it.
body,
Yeah.
just based on what you just said, the body is, again, this sort of macro microcosm of what's going on the planet. So the ways that, the ecosystems in nature have been, attacked and degraded, and, need attention, and some of those protections go away, and you're like, well, I guess nobody cares, and they just keep dumping and burning and plowing and stuff. But it's it's a perfect analogy for what goes on in our bodies, because cancer. I've been reading and listening a lot about cancer, because I always thought, well, the earth has some issues. It's sick in places, it's polluted, it's broken down, it's not being protected, it's not being cherished. And then you go, ourselves and our bodies and our minds and things. So
Right.
it's very,
Extrapolation into.
that's where that, for me, that concept of holistic comes from. And the idea of
Right.
somatic is that it also, it's very much the way we perceive things, and all of the information we get from our senses, and all the things going on in our nervous system, all interplay to
Mm-hmm.
make our reality. And those can translate into, whether we're well or unwell, you know,
Yeah.
disturbed or not, all the different, the gradations of how we feel and think and are in our body. So that's the holistic somatic approach. It definitely matters where you live and who you're talking to every day and what's getting reflected back to you and what you pay attention to online. Do you go on and listen to the, food revolution guys talking about the stuff they talked about in the 70s,
Yeah.
which is truer than ever? Or do you go on and listen, watch every, you know, car crash that you can find online? And people say, oh, i'm
Well,
getting i'm getting
go
off
ahead.
of social media because of all the crap on there. It's like, oh my God, my social media is all about, learning and being inspired and going
Hmm.
deeper, and information and inspiration. So it's
Yeah.
a choice. It's kind of a choice.
Well, and in that, exactly, it is a choice, because my feed is really different too. I don't have a lot of like political, argumentative, gossipy crap coming across. I don't even have that in my emails. You know what I mean? As far as like the spams and things that get sent, it's so minimal these days. But you were talking about, the ecosystem of the body, the ecosystem of the earth, and how it's a micro macro. And interestingly, the other night, a friend of mine texted me and he says, did you know that there are 7 Superfund sites in Fort Bragg? And that's Fort Bragg, California. And he says, we need to tell everybody about this. They need to know. And I'm like, you didn't know that? I mean, you didn't. If you're not paying attention, you didn't. This is that thing about paying attention. And it got me curious, just as a curiosity. I looked up there's 58 Superfund sites in Kern County, California. 58.
Oh,
And you can find that information easy.
Kern
Just in
County.
Kern County, 58 Superfund sites.
Kern
And
County
that
is
it's that thing. If you don't know what's going on, if you're not paying attention, it's really hard to address it. And then when you have those symptoms, those things happening in your body, it's also really easy to misinterpret and be and get disinformation. Then you just listen to the experts that tell you what you need to do. Here, you need to take this pill, you need to know that you're going to be in a wheelchair in a decade and whatnot. So the act of revolution and resistance of educating yourself and paying attention. And this is what I hear you saying. It's like, no, I'm not going to accept just the dominant answer paradigm. I'm going to go find out for myself what's going on. I'm going to find out the Superfund sites in my own body, and I'm going to take care of that.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Am I hitting the points for you?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole woke concept, somebody gave me a really perfect little definition the other day. It's simply, and this was from way back, Leadbelly, the musician, had a definition for woke, and it was simply being aware and responsive to injustice. And people who have been involved in the ecology movement and global, environmental movement are just that. They stay awake to what's happening. They stay informed. They don't make up stories and theories about why this and that's happening. They look at what can be I don't even want to use the word science, because people get really religious about science too, but they have a relationship with information that you can't refute. Like I was connected to various farm worker communities living in California since the late 60s, early 70s. And the heartbreak that I have about the fact that they are still being treated the way they've always been treated, and worse now. And it never, I mean, yes, they figured out about boycotts and things like that and changed some of the unionizing and things like that, but their exposure to the pesticides that they have to use on the crops, which get nicely packaged, those beautiful strawberries in Santa Cruz, get packaged up and sold in the markets. And then if you ride your bike past those fields and see people in hazmat suits lining up picking strawberries, and that's their life, and they have to live in these little shanty areas next to the fields, and that is still going on, even though we were fighting about it, for it, against it, for 50 years. So you could get really despondent, or you could do what you can do. You can do what you can do for yourself, the people that you live with, the people in your town. And that's the way I've been able to function in seeing what's going on now. It's just like, I'm going to just teach what I know right here. There's 7 people, there's 10 people that show up to my talks. They're excited about, I brought in this, I'm doing a class, and it's twice a month, and one is me talking and doing Q&A about nutrition and body and stuff, and the other one is like a guest speaker coming in. And so we have this herbalist that lives in town. She hasn't been here much longer than me, or less than me, I think, but she's brilliant. And she we're going to have her back by popular demand, because it's something people can viscerally, physically touch, taste, smear. They were just like, she made this like herbal oil thing, and people were just like slathering themselves with this stuff to feel something through, on their body, their hands, and their taste. And it's like, I just wanted everybody to take off all their clothes and like put it all over themselves and each other. And I just had this vision I mean, the whole,
I'm down, baby. We're
I
going.
know. Well, you asked me to bring,
Absolutely.
you said joy and pleasure. And if the people who are doing the hard work of fighting the monsters in our society and stuff don't have a time to have or get together and have, some kind of joyfulness and pleasure, bodily, mentally, spiritually,
Absolutely.
it, that's, well, if they have that,
Hmm.
that's their best medicine, right? Something like that.
Staying awake is hard work because it does weigh heavy. I mean, I'll just tell you the truth. This morning I woke up and I was weepy. Like there's a huge grieving coming through me of some sort. And, I did a lot of writing about it. And, you know, there's just a heaviness. People die, people get sick. There's the stuff happening politically and environmentally and I you and I've had these conversations. There's that place where it's just like, can I just shut the fuck off for a while? Can I just not be aware for a minute? Am I just a weird freak that just, is always anxious about things because the fucking world is falling apart, that's that feeling. But one of the things that shifted for me, and I'm glad you spoke into the joy and the pleasure part, it's because the suffering is always going to happen. You're always going to have assholes. People are going to get sick. There's going to be natural disasters. Shit happens,
Things break.
I've made a choice to try to pursue the pleasure, like come at it from the pleasure side, like you were just saying, like feel the feelings, the yumminess, the next to my skin connection with nature, with myself, with other people, so that maybe through that connection some of that weight can be distributed
Mm.
or lessened, or integrated in a way that goes like, okay, there's a reason why I'm doing this. You know what I mean? And you and I've had these conversations, and I, not speaking for you, but I know you've expressed very similar things. And what it feels like is this nutrition piece that you're moving into now is kind of this weaving together, no pun intended, because you're a master
Weaver.
weaver, but this idea of bringing all of those parts together into this integrated piece that like gives some meaning to it, to life, to and purpose to this sense of separation and grand suffering that we've often felt in our lives. And I think a lot of
It
other
really
people too.
does.
I
It
hear it
really,
in lots of other groups.
it really does. And people can't always articulate it, but you can tell if you give them a space to have those thoughts and feelings in a communal space, they shift. And somebody said that after the first class. They said, this is the first time I've sat with a group of people eating something I made and brought for them to taste. They said, we're eating this thing, and no one is, what did she say? It was so cool. I thought, oh, I want to save that as a testimonial for what this is all for. There was no judgment. People weren't telling them what to eat and what not to eat. There wasn't like a right and a wrong. There was just the food going in, consciously being tasted. And I could see kind of a vision of the food being, incorporated into their cells and into their minds. And I saw this kind of liberation in a moment of seeing what it's really about. And these are people that have suffered with some really, really intense, serious physical problems. And they told stories of going to the doctors and being, just treated like a thing, like a machine. Like you said, it's not a machine, but treated very mechanistically, and this was sensual, and it was in the moment, and they felt held and cared for in that moment. And it was so different than like, catering a wedding and having people just like drinking and eating and grabbing food and, just like not really appreciating what, I mean, I know if it's a party, that's not what it's about, but this was such a conscious space to have a different relationship with the food. And the food is about the senses. And we circumvent that. We gobble, we, swallow, we, and then we're all burpy and farty and we just can't take a shit, or we take a shit too fast, or, it's that everything is just weird timing. But with breath, breathing, sitting, acknowledging, maybe, having some grace or gratitude for that moment. I didn't ask them to do that. It was a language between the life in the food and the life in their life. It was a life to life connection.
I think that's amazing. We are so hungry, just inviting that space and opening that space up. And it is amazing how people will just step into that and fully embody it and grace it, grace that space with their presence. And it oftentimes just takes that invitation, like, here you go. And so thank you for doing that. That's amazing. Well, what you do is pretty amazing anyway. Um, it's like all the questions that I wanted to ask you, we've been weaving all of those in. It's kind of like maybe we know each other a little bit. But you know what? Talk about your class a little bit more. This thing you're doing. What all is involved? Is it something online that people can get into, or is this just an in-person? Yeah.
Well, it started with the tiny farmers market that we had here. I wanted to be involved in it somehow. And what I used to do in California, I was a market chef, and I created food at the market that people could taste, and there would be a list of ingredients, and I would point, the turnips came from that guy, the eggs came from that guy, go get your stuff from them, here's your recipe, go home and make it. And they would, and they'd come back and tell me the next week they made it. They didn't know what a kohlrabi was, but now they do. And, it's just like enlightenment around food and the produce that was being brought to the market. So I had this vision like, I could do that here. I'll talk to all the farmers and get something from each of them and make a recipe and feed people tastes of this stuff. So I started doing that small scale. And each year I did something a little bit different. The market was at a time of day that was very hot, so I couldn't really cook. And then it was just like, I can't stand here. It's 100 degrees and I don't feel healthy out here. So it just kept morphing. And finally I said, I got to teach cooking and I got to do it in a kitchen inside, climate controlled, basically. And I did that for a couple of years here. And the book about the blue zones had just come out, the National Geographic book that this guy came up with, the blue zones around the world, places where people were living to be 100 or more. Why? It's this analysis. And I thought, well, why don't we create a little blue zone here in Dixon, New Mexico? There's 800 people that live here. How many people live to be 100? Quite a few have or are getting to 100. But what are the elements here? So I was just going to teach some really basic cooking stuff. And I did that throughout the year. And then it was like the labor of cooking, buying all the food, cooking, I got to just shrink this down. The main thing I want to do is talk about the nutrition part of it, because people can eat and they can say it's yummy and they can come back and they'll pay you $20 to teach them, show, demo something. But the nutrition part it's a little more intellectual or technical, and I don't get into the tech. I try not to use the scientific words for everything, because it turns, it doesn't, it's not as digestible. So what was your question? um
that was a good pun. It's not digestible. It's true. Well, so one of the things you said in your bio is body wisdom nutrition secrets is a somatic approach to living in the body while being fully accountable for its nourishment, rejuvenation, vitality, radiance, and healing. So in this course, or in this, I guess it's a course, right?
yeah.
What how do you give people that information? What do you have them do? What would a typical day look like in one of those?
Well, it'll be kind of progressive, and we just had the first month of April, had the 2 sessions, and so it's a series that'll kind of be built as we go through the year to see what the interests and needs are. Like, we're adding the herbal part now, which, I didn't know who was going to respond. We have a seed expert coming in a couple of 2 months from now. We have a local guy at one of the pueblos who's going to bring the kids he works with, and they're going to talk about, their sense of place here as indigenous people in this area, and just talk from their heart and experience, and their artists, and weave that in. So it's going to be different as the year goes on, but the part that I want people to be connected to is their own agency and accountability for what's going on in their lives. So that's what I end up talking about, not in a pedantic way, but a way to say you have the with information, and sensitizing yourself, paying attention to how you feel after you eat, or when you don't eat, or if you eat too much, or you can't get a hold of the food you want. What happens in your heart and mind when your relationship with food and how it's becoming who you are. Try to give them some language around making choices. We talk about choosing, voting with your dollars, to let the corporations know whether you want that shit or not. And so it's like choosing the most nutrient dense food to sort of vote with your body about what your body really wants and needs, and that's going to be different for everybody. So the biodiversity of people and their nutritional needs and their sensitivities and response to foods, and food isn't even food anymore. It's kind of like it's like navigating this minefield of the things that you're taking in, depending on how it's grown. And anyway, I try not to get judgmental about it, but my heart wants them to know that they can participate in this process of their own nourishment. And
Yeah, I mean that goes back to what we were talking about before. Is it's harder to be awake, and then there's a call to be responsible about it. About what's going on, and uh, we've known about this. First off, there's the indigenous wisdom and ancient wisdom, and the things that have built our societies over the millennium. We do have a deep knowledge in our bodies. It's evolutionary. It's part of all cultures if you care to listen. It's just like now in this modern world, everything is kind of done for you in such a way that you kind of don't have to. But then people are wondering why they're sick, you know?
and feel
I
disconnected.
remember reading a report from back in the 1800s, the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, that was already talking about how the refinement of flour, for instance, and this processes, and the food that people were eating, and the detrimental effects it was already having on people at that time. And this is way back when, so it's not like this is new information. But then there's that, how do you make people take responsibility? You can't. But what we can do, which sounds like what you're doing, and hopefully that I'm trying to do too, is make solutions palatable in a way. Like, it doesn't have to be this big, convoluted, complicated thing where you're having to grow your own garden and you have to know about all the foods and all the nutrition, but you can be conscious of where you buy your stuff. There is letting the farmers do their jobs, but then buying from them and supporting them and understanding that, that's,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the important somatic message is um, facilitating people having a direct experience, um, having a direct experience with food, where it comes from, how it affects you, and maybe some knowledge about different choices. And uh, so the senses are really important. Just being with, smelling, tasting, um, allowing the body to be the whole nervous system to be in a relaxed enough state so that it can take in the nutrition, instead of this hyper state where it's lost. It goes straight through, and things get kind
Right.
of patchy in there, and it aren't functioning right. So I've been really I know I've known about it for a really long time, but and apparently Hippocrates knew about it too, and said that all health and illness
Mm-hmm.
starts in the gut, which is the process in the that we know now as the large intestine. And there's all these microbes in there, more microbes than there are cells in our body. And somehow that guy knew. And I don't like making quotes, because I don't know how much of that is actually true. But if this guy, a few thousand years ago was saying that, and now we can kind of demonstrate that, that's some information that people could do some research around. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what is going on? Why do we call it the gut? What is the gut? What is the microbiome? They've only just now sequenced the genetics of what's going on in the gut. And that blows my mind, because all of this stuff is happening. That sequence happened after I got my certification in this subject. So you can never
Right.
really stop paying attention to it. And I'm particularly interested in it. And so I'm a geek that way. I'm just going to look at it as long as I'm here, and try to tell people about it. It's like, well,
Right.
here's something you could pay attention to. And it's tricky, because people do not want to be told what to do. They don't want rights and wrongs. They don't want to feel any more judgment or stress around food and things than they already do. I mean, I came into this thing, and I told people in the first email, I said, I've had my whole life, I've had uh, body issues, food drama. I've tried every diet. I've read every article, and I still have this very conflicted relationship between my body and food and the social part. I recently did a kind of a chart of, you know, trying to anyway, it's just a whole food relationship elimination kind of thing. And it turned out that the areas of where there was the most conflict was when I was eating socially, or eating somebody else's food at a party or their house, or fixing food for somebody else, and ending up going against my own best information for myself, just to fit in, just to feel connected to the people, and I didn't feel so great
Mhm.
afterwards, but it was kind of worth it because I looked like you know, a good a good I played the game for that 24 hours and I paid for it silently later.
A good community member.
Yeah. So
I
I
was just
go ahead.
listening to you. That the body is just this incredible community, right? And most of what makes us human isn't even human. If you look at the mitochondria and, like you said, the gut biome, all the bacterias, and it's just like there's it, but it melds together and it works together, and it's just this beautiful ecosystem. And eating is the way you were talking about it with the senses and whatnot. It's like it's kind of like making love. You're just, oh, you can feel it in your hands. You can taste it in your mouth. You can rub it on you if you want. You know what I mean? I've always had this dream of like taking like two mangoes and just like having a exercise in a group, and everybody's got these mangoes and it just squeezes and lets the juice run all over them, and just like you saying, that naked bodies. And you know a good portion, it seems like to me, of nutritional health is that relationship to our food. Like, not just, I like it, it tastes good, but like that connection, that feeling, you where it comes from. You you feel the textures of it. You know that it's you. As soon as you, especially once you put that in your body, it is you. That is just it, informing and creating and building and taking away. It's just such a such an integrated process. All of that, just
Yeah,
I just now I want to go
absolutely.
eat.
I know my stomach's rumbling, but I don't know what our time's like. Do we have another minute?
We don't really have a time limit, but I,
I
yeah.
just wanted to say something that popped into my mind when you were talking. Our gut microbiome, you can look it up. It's fascinating. But we co-evolved to have that way of eating, breaking down the nutrients, getting them to all parts of the body, protecting the body from other, assaults from within and from without. And it's getting harder and harder. That part of the body's getting more and more work to do because there's more and more imbalance and poison and stuff that comes in and aggravates these systems that aren't perfect. It is an evolutionary process. It's always evolving, but we co-evolved with this internal way of nourishing ourselves, and I'm going to be doing more looking into it and talking about it and writing about it and stuff because it's very poetic to me, this
Yeah. And
symbiotic
have you
relationship.
heard of this? Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
wanted to say one more
Absolutely.
thing, that the
Hmm.
sense of disconnection with that, this thing that is vitally part of us, is what brings up that weepiness, that sense of grief and loss, that we're not living every day in community with our own um,
With our
bio
own stuff.
ourselves. It's ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know why. I know, what a lot of things in our culture have led to that. I'm not going to name those things right now because that's another conversation, but it came to me, that sense of grief of losing. If we had it to initially, we had it intuitively, and maybe we learned some things about it and might have like wanted to try to grow that, but now it's very peripheral and lost in a lot of ways, and that sense of loss
Mhm.
of our connectedness and that symbiotic aliveness is cause for a sense of grief, and that that in itself can disrupt our wellness. So working on the grief and the loss and the just the poignancy of being alive and not really allowed to. My body and food drama comes from day one, how I was treated, from the minute I came out into that setting. Nothing I did naturally was accepted or acceptable, and that just like set me up. So I can really, really empathize for almost everybody who feels like an alien, and doesn't do things on their own best behalf because of that training from that treatment from day one. I have empathy for that, and I've participated in it. I've perpetuated it in my own ways. I've done damage, and it's humanity, whatever. But I just wanted to put that in there because processing some of the feelings around the way we've been treated, we want to naturally eat with our hands and let it drool and then, smear it on our hair. And,
right, exactly.
We don't want to be slapped at the table every time we sit down to eat. We don't want to be smacked upside of the head and told to be quiet and finish our plate. And oh my God, how can you possibly digest anything? And of course, you're going to be fat, or you're going to be allergic. You're going to be, all stress,
ADHD, asthma.
Yeah.
I mean, all the things that people get.
From
exactly.
So
it is.
That's where my passion falls, is just like, let's just chip away at this when and where we can.
Yeah, we don't want to fall into, that morbid belly button staring, like woe is me, or complacency, like, oh no, it's too big, I can't do anything. Or also falling into that place where like it's all falling on my shoulders and I've got to fix the world. But that right-sized, one step at a time, do what you can, add something in, to the conversation when you can, that's finding that space.
That's how I deal with
to do that.
Nutrition too. Is like, people don't want to be told what not to eat, so I usually tell them, here's something to add in, and the more of those things you add in, the less room there is for the grab and go kind of thing. And that's whether people follow that or not. That worked for me. That helped me get over some different food addiction things, trigger foods and things that were just always there, and they were always going to be there, and I could always grab them and pretend that it didn't matter. But if I had other things to put in, that I had to learn what those things were and why they were better for my particular system, some of those other things were able to fall away. And the imprint of them will probably be always there. I'm always going to want a cigarette, no matter how long my life is. I'm always going to want a cigarette.
Right.
And when I want a cigarette is when I've just broken up with somebody, because my heart is sort of like empty and I just want to fill up that space in my chest. Like, anyway, that is just another little analogy. But it's about relationships and feelings, and it's all, the body has all that information.
Yeah, it does. It certainly does. Well, you just kind of talked about something, this balance between nourishment and pleasure, and how, we can stay attuned to both without slipping into control or denial. You were just kind of talking about that, it seems like. But you have anything to add to that?
Well, it's a learning process because, again, we've had a lot beaten out of us that would come naturally. That nourishment, the pleasure taking of nourishment seems like it would naturally be there. And in a more natural environment, there would be no question about that. But um, I've had to question that a lot because I've, because of stuff, like I said, that happened from day one, seeing our naturalness, like in my siblings especially, taken away and berated and
Mm-hmm.
beaten out, literally out of us on a daily basis, made it seem like there
Mm-hmm.
was something wrong with us. And the
Mm-hmm.
environment was telling us we shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Don't eat that. Eat that. Eat it now. Don't eat it now. Don't talk when you eat. Don't sit when you don't. And it took me more than half of my life to find out or to realize that my parents were the way they were because of that. They were the whole generational lineage of
Right.
where this stuff comes from, and whether there was ever a place back in time when people weren't having that. I'll never know. I don't know if it's true for anything or anybody. We were all indigenous once, but we all probably still did really shitty things to each other in those settings. And again, we
Oh
try to
yeah.
romanticize
Absolutely.
or fetishize the indigenous world that we feel like we've lost. But I have felt like I lost my indigenous self. I've had experiences of what that was and why that was part of me at some point. The memory or the
Mm-hmm.
imprint of that, I treasure that because I feel grief about that every day. And um but it's kind of like maybe the magic of creating food and sitting together and eating it together and expressing our most basic humanness together, um, is a way of reintegrating what has been lost. A good relationship, a
Right.
good marriage, a good child thing, a good childhood, a good setting. Uh,
Yeah.
you can't erase history and all the things that have happened, but you can give yourself this moment of, uh, I don't know, like a liberation from
Grace and integration.
integration, gracing.
Well, I mean, great. We can give ourselves grace, like because, like you say, we can't erase what's happened, and there's forces that are beyond our control that sort of shaped us to where we are. And so the being able to give ourselves grace, this is sort of the way I look at it, being able to give myself some grace around that. Like, hey, I didn't make myself perceive the world the way that I perceive the world. But what I can do is I can integrate all that, and then in spite of that, I can begin to make more choices differently. Like in that self-authoring place where I am not just what I was raised to be. That's not the only thing that I am. I was thinking about that place, where we've lost our roots, whether you want to call them indigenous roots or just our connection to nature. And, a few years ago, I lived on a biodynamic, or no, I'm sorry, not biodynamic, but oh, what's the word I'm looking for? The other kind of farm. Anyway, it was a really neat place in Hawaii. And it was a polyamorous community and a permaculture community. And, and we, part of my work I was doing a kind of a partial work for stay. And so I had to go out and put in a certain amount of hours during the week. And, I've got pictures of it. It's just like muddy and dirty and barefoot and cut off jeans and no shirt and just moving into the jungle. And it was like hard work in the sun and the heat and the wet and but then there was good food and there was community and and look back at it and I felt really happy. I just felt really happy. I also realized that if I stayed there, none of the work that I'm doing would really go anywhere. Like I wouldn't be able to like take this work out into the world, right? And so there's that grieving place for that, but then there's kind of what you were talking about. It's like I can integrate that and bring it to here, and then use that energy to teach. But there really is, of that in the dirt connection. So, I don't know. I think that I'm still finding a balance in that myself. Right now there's a piece of integration and pulling all of this stuff together still to a certain extent. But that's where I want to be, in those places where I can feel like I go right to the garden to help plant the things. I clean up the weeds and put manure on and cut. And pick and cook. And, it's just like, it is such a fulfilling sensation to be in that. And I think it's all in all of our DNA. I really do think it's in all of our DNA.
Coevolution for sure.
And that a lot of the ills of the modern world are because we have largely shut ourselves off from that. We put concrete on everything. We wear synthetics, canned air. These communities where people live right next to each other but don't know each other. There's we put a lawn in instead of a food garden, and we're really cut off from a lot of this stuff. I appreciate where you're living, because and that's kind of like being in Fort Bragg, Northern California, or whatever. It's just a lot more of that natural connection, and it's right there present. It's you walk down the road and it's not all concrete, and you can be in the woods real quick. Well, Jen, I think that we are coming to an end here. We've really talked about a lot of things today, and I'm sure we've given the audience a lot to think about, and hopefully question, and come into the communities and connect with us, and continue this conversation. Maybe you've already answered this, and maybe this will be a repeat, but just a question that I like to ask people at the end of these is, what are you passionate about today?
Well, I think out of what we talked about today, the thing I'm going to be thinking about is what we sort of ended on, that giving ourselves grace, some space to not be perfect and not be like always like driving something home to everybody, or having answers. I see it as a continuing of our coevolution as humans on this particular planet at this time. It's because I can get into that bleak sort of place, and I don't want to stay there. So I'm grabbing the different nutrients that I need to stay in the life force. And I think I feel passionate about that, because when I get the most upset is when I remember, things that I actually know. I call somebody, or I plan something, or I write another, you know, unit of my series, because it might just look like information to somebody, or like a piece of paper, but to me it's connected to uh, a soul, a body and soul knowledge, something my body really, really knows. And my soul is there to, uh, you know, hold that. Like, yeah, go for it, do it. It doesn't have to make a difference. It doesn't have to make an impact. It doesn't have to be that whole, corporate kind of, just do it. we do have it. It's alive in the moment. So I'm passionate about doing everything I can in my life to stay alive to the moment, even if it's my last moment, maybe put it that way. And it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. And I don't have to explain it to anybody else. I don't have to explain my differences or my weirdness or my brokenness or, anything to anybody else. We all have our own drama going on. And what if we each just sat together whenever we can and let everybody be who they are and because education, like to be an educator, is to me it's kind of like shit. That is just so uh top down, you know, fill it in, spit it out. I rebel against that, and I'm not always popular because of that, because you know it's another sacred cow, education, blah blah blah. Um, but being open to there's an aliveness in the universe, in our planet, in our solar system, in our atmosphere, in our eco blob that we sit in, whether it's Fort Bragg or Dixon or LA or wherever, that has something we can uh, learn from and be curious about, be really jumping up and down about. Look at that! Look at that! Look at that! Right now, it's the microbiome for me, and dealing with friends with cancer, and making those fucking smoothies every morning because they have everything in them that I need. And
Well, thank you, Jen. I really, really love talking to you. You know that, and we have, like I said, for years have just had these amazing conversations, and I'm so glad to um, have you here and getting that amazing voice out to a wider audience. This is what we want to do
Yeah, and if
with
anybody wants to talk to me
the
about
wisdom.
anything, I'm here, and I've been doing everything sort of hands on and in person right here. But there are some things in the works for you know
Yeah.
being available to people that are afar, and we can let you know about that as we go along.
So how would somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to do that right now?
I have a website that's junaartandwellness.com.